Hi, welcome to MEALZEE Minutes. This is where we deep dive on all things health and fitness, and we try and do it in under 10 minutes. I'll do my best. This week, we're going to be talking about overcoming appetite. This is episode 2. Episode 1 was all about controlling hunger. Okay, so a quick recap is hunger is more physiologically driven. It's more that need to eat, okay? Whereas appetite's more the want to eat. It's more sensory driven. So the example I talk about with my clients is that we tend to eat dinner because of hunger, because we haven't eaten since maybe lunch or mid-afternoon. Whereas if someone brings out dessert, that's our appetite, okay? It's more appealing to the senses. We've just eaten, so we're not necessarily hungry, but we can still eat because we know it tastes amazing. So why does this happen? Okay, so it stems back to our evolutionary design, if you like. Think about our Paleolithic ancestors. They didn't know how many calories was in food, because all they knew was that it tasted amazing. And so this was the brain's learning reward system saying, hey, this is really sweet. There's lots of energy in it. Let's do this again. Eat it again. See if you can find more. And that was just basically how we could determine whether something had calories or not, or protein. And so we get these cravings associated with our senses, and they're often tied to a particular nutrient. So it might be something sweet or fat or protein or glutamate, which is more your savory options. Starchy options, which again is a good energy source. Fat is a great energy source in terms of the duration that it'll supply. And then we've got sodium, which is the only non-calorie craving that we might get, but certainly serves a purpose within the body. Now, this was demonstrated quite powerfully in a study back in the 60s, I think it was, where they determined how powerful dopamine was. So dopamine is the neurotransmitter in the brain that's released in response to a really intense flavor. And so what they could do, they stimulated a dopamine response in these rodents, had them hooked up to little electrodes, and every time they put their head into a box, they'd stimulate a dopamine release. Now, this developed a pattern where eventually the rodents were looking to put their head in the box 800 times an hour. Okay, so this is how powerful dopamine is. Now, think about that with something like chocolate or pizza, where you get a combination of these nutrients, whether it's sugar and fat in chocolate, or fat, starch, and salt in pizza, and you get a big dopamine hit in the brain. And this is why it's hard to say, hey, stop eating that. And, I'm certainly guilty of it when it comes to pizza. Now, this is also linked to association. Okay, so, like whether it comes to the intensity of flavor that you might experience at a particular time, and the habit can really be instilled because for me it was beer in summer. Like when I mow the yard, I enjoy a cold beer, and then now every time I mow the yard, it's nice to have a cold beer afterwards. And I struggled with this when I gave up drinking for a number of months when my wife was pregnant. It was a silly bet I had, that was the one thing. I could go to a party and not drink. That wasn't a problem, but after I mowed the yard, I really struggled, and so I was using like zero alcohol beers. And so we develop these associations, and it's because our appetite, it's our senses are very closely connected to our memory, and it's why, and they're right next door to each other in the part of the brain, and it's why you can smell something or taste something, and it reminds you of a time gone by. Now, Pavlov's dog is a really good example. For those that aren't familiar with this, this is a famous study by Dmitry Pavlov, I think his name was. I could have that wrong, but it's a Russian scientist, where he could demonstrate that we associate, we can develop associations, if you like, with behavior and habit. And so what he could do is he would ring a bell and then feed the dog. And so he would do that consistently enough. The dog then determined that the bell meant food was coming, to the point where he could ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate whether there was food there or not. And I can certainly relate to that. If I, just with smells going past something, you can start to salivate even though the food isn't necessarily in front of me. Now, just quickly, I'm going to touch on this, okay? So I am going to get to about how to overcome appetite, but it's really important to establish that, this is not news that we've got an obesity and overweight epidemic that's really happening across westernized, not civilized, sorry, across westernized countries. And the correlation that you see with the availability of really hyperpalatable, high-calorie, readily available fast food has grown equally. So I pick on McDonald's here in Australia. These numbers have just exploded in terms of how many McDonald's we see around the place. Now, it's not just McDonald's. You can go into the chemist now and buy chocolate, or fueling up your car, or at the supermarket. We're bombarded by really readily available high-calorie snacks that give us a big dopamine hit in the brain. And I think about my grandmother. She would love cake and biscuits, but she had to bake it herself most of the time. Obviously, she got older and, there were shops closer by, but, in her younger days, she had to go and bake these items, whereas now they're readily available. And it's a big part of why we've got such a problem, is because our society is what's called obesogenic. It is so easy to overeat these really high calorie foods. So think about that when you're at home or at work, okay? So if you want to overcome your appetite, What are you exposing yourself to? What are you exposing your senses to? You know, if you can see it all the time, or it's within reach, or you know it's in the desk, or you've just got to open the fridge and it's there, that's enough for, you know, it to distract you and you start to salivate, and it's really hard to overcome it in that situation. So I'm going to show you a series of images here, okay? So this is just to demonstrate that feeling that might, you know, that you might get when exposed to certain foods. We all know that broccoli is really good for us, quite a potent anti-cancer fighting food, beneficial for a number of reasons, but does it really drive a craving to go out and eat more broccoli? Not many people would have their hand up. Similarly with baby spinach or potatoes, you know, okay, yes, if they're deep fried and they've got salt on them, they're a little bit more appealing, if you like, but you know, seeing that appeal potato that's yet to be cooked, it doesn't really drive that desire to eat. Equally with a cucumber, or an apple. Now, an apple probably slightly more. There's a little bit more sweetness and energy in that one. And so, you know, there are times where you might crave an apple. But if we compare it to the next series of images, what does this conjure up? Okay, now, thankfully, most fast food outlets don't produce a burger like this. It's only a picture on the board. What you get is, you know, wilted lettuce, and the tomato doesn't look that good. But you can see how the appeal of this is visually appealing, and it can really appeal to the senses and the appetite. And so you've got to think about what you're exposing yourself to here all the time in order to overcome it. Okay, so this just quickly, I think I'm going to be within 10 minutes if I hurry up. This is a study that was showing the part of the brain in the hypothalamus that controls eating behavior. And it was a functional MRI. So this is Stefan Guine, if anyone's interested, he's an expert in the field. Awesome book called The Hungry Brain if you want to learn more. But he was, as part of this study, he was getting a functional MRI of himself, and he was in there and he was exposed to different images. And you can see, I know it doesn't look like much, but you can see that little orange spot there in the middle. It doesn't look like much, but that's actually an explosion of activity in that part of the brain, whereas the broccoli doesn't elicit that response. So thinking, if we want to control our weight, for example, you want to lose weight, you want to maintain weight, what are you exposing yourself to all the time? Because it's all good and well to say just use willpower, don't eat it, you know, just be strong. But willpower fatigues, it doesn't strengthen. Okay, willpower, the more you expose yourself to these foods, the weaker you get. This was demonstrated in a great study by a psychologist called Roy Bowmaster, I think it was, where he basically exposed people to these freshly baked chocolate chip muffins, and the others could eat, some part of the group could eat the muffins, the other part had to eat radishes. Then they had to perform these seemingly unrelated tests to test, you know, how persistent they were on performing these tasks. And those that had to eat radishes failed quite substantially, because they were mentally fatigued of having to use willpower. And so think about that for your own situation. Okay, if you're trying to lose weight, and you know you're trying to rely on willpower, what are you faced with when you wake up and open the fridge, or you know, when you open your cupboard, or even what's in your desk at work? You're trying to use willpower to overcome these situations, but it's fatiguing you. Now, you may be able to do it while motivation is high. Okay, you might be motivated that, you know, I'm not going to eat this food because I'm determined to get to a certain weight. But long term, how good is that motivation going to be? Motivation is only a short-term thing. You've got to try and control the environment to help something become sustainable. Okay, now I'm going to whiz through that. I won't talk about that because I'm about to run out of time. But okay, so this I just wanted to quickly touch on. So there's a really interesting study a number of years ago now that it showed that 70% of our weight was predetermined for us by the time we're 2 years old. Okay, so this is like genetics. It's what mum ate in the womb, what we ate up until we're about 2 years old. 5% is the daily choices. It's what me as a dietitian try and teach people, okay? Know about calories, fiber, protein, you know, how to put a meal together. But 25% of the influence on our weight is our lifestyle and environment, okay? So it's the 25% that influences that 5% in daily choices. It's all good and well to know what you should be eating, but if all you've got access to is high calorie foods, or they're there all the time, then you're really going to struggle to, you know, make the right choice. And so I'll skip through that bit again. What I really encourage my clients to do is to make it unhealthy food choices difficult. Doesn't mean don't eat them. I'm not a Nazi that you never get to eat these foods, but think of like 1 day a week versus 7 days a week. And I get people to break their week down. You know, you might have 30 odd meals in a week. One of those meals being a bit of a cheat meal, for the want of a better word, isn't the problem. It's the food that's there every day, and it might just put you at a maintenance level, and then the weekend you eat an excess of calories that pushes you over. Now, the average adult in Australia gains 1 kilo per year of their adult life from the age of 30 to 65. That's not much, okay? And it indicates that you've only just got to be eating over every now and then and at a maintenance level the rest of the time. So one day out of the whole week isn't a problem. It's the stuff that's in the home, what's in your fridge and cupboard, what's in your pantry, what's at work. These are the things that may not seem that bad, like on looking at them, but because they're every day, they're going to have a greater impact. So have a good think about that. Really try and control the senses, okay? This is the thing that's going to make you overeat when there isn't that desire or the need to eat. It's more just the want to eat, okay? So really control your senses. And if you're overeating, after a meal, this is an issue of mine. I struggle to switch off. There's some tips around that. So if you're interested, I can send you a bit of a downloadable resource to give you some tips around controlling the senses after a meal. So take home from today, guys, be really mindful about what you've got in the fridge and cupboard. If you want to overcome appetite, you've got to think about what you're exposing your senses to.